Hello and welcome to Views on News. I'm Jawad. Tehami. Pakistan's Finance Minister Mohammad Aurangzeb says that he's aiming to ensure that Pakistan moves towards the permanent macroeconomic stability, which would later turn into growth. He's also said he would reduce the leakages in revenue and the expenditure in the PSDP through the public-private partnership. He's also said Pakistan would enter China's bond market in the ongoing year. During his first visit at the Federal Board of Revenue, the finance minister has also said digitization of the tax system is the government's top priority. Regarding the second and the final review of the $3 billion standby arrangement with the International Monetary Fund, he said Pakistan is in a good position in terms of fulfilling the prerequisites. He had earlier said that the government will also ask for a new longer-term bailout. We also know that an IMF mission is already here in Pakistan that will hold talks with the Pakistani authorities from 14th of March to 18th of March. In these 5 days of talks, the IMF mission will have the second and the final review of that $3 billion standby arrangement. And also this particular mission has called on the finance minister today, and there were discussions that happened regarding various indicators and various conditions which were set by the IMF and Pakistan's progress regarding that. Also, earlier we saw that Finance Ministry had said, let me quote it, the statement, Pakistan has met all the structural benchmarks, qualitative performance criteria and indicative targets for successful completion of the IMF review, unquote. Also, Pakistan's Prime Minister Mohammad Shehbaz Sharif, in his interview with Chinese state news agency Xinhua, has renewed call for further strengthening the bilateral relations with China, and also said that Pakistan is aiming to move towards the second phase of the China-Pakistan economic corridor. We'll also bring that particular interview up for discussion in today's show. For that, we are honored to have been joined in the studio by Dr. Shujat Farooq. He's Chief of Research in Pakistan Institute of Development Economics. Dr. Farooq, thank you very much for your time, for being with us on the show tonight. Really appreciate that. Also, in the studio, we are honored to have been joined by Dr. Manzoor Ahmad. He's member of the Task Force on APR and Tax Reforms and former ambassador to the World Trade Organization. Dr. Ahmad, thank you very much for your time, also for being with us on the show tonight. Really appreciate that. Let me start with you, Dr. Farooq, by looking at these particular statements by the new finance minister, the overall economic policy framework now which he has outlined. How do you see it in terms of coherence, feasibility and the potential impact on Pakistan's economic growth prospects in the at least medium to immediate to medium terms?
Thank you. I think now we are moving towards some right direction. You know that over the last 1 year, the government have taken a significant structural measures. For example, you can see in the recent economic outlook that showing certain positive picture that, for example, you know that we have two sort of balances. One is the external balance and the other is internal balance. So good thing is that, for example, if we look the economy from July to January, our current account deficit that have significantly declined, and that declined by 71%. So that is just around, right now it is just $1 billion. So I am expecting that in this fiscal year, this current account deficit that would be just $2 billion. So earlier, you know that this was around more than $10 billion. So this is a big, I think, movement. On the other internal side, again you can see that fiscal discipline that is improving. So we can see that primary balance, for example, so again primary balance again that is surplus around 1.5 trillion. So again we are moving toward the right direction. So these are certain, I think, positive things where we can see that GDP, you know that is in a recovery phase. Right now it is around 2.1%. So you know that over the last 2 years it was negative. So that is a good thing. Agriculture growth again this year, you know, that that is positive. Rice was positive. Again, we are expecting good growth in the wheat sector as well. Manufacture, again there is recovery, and you know that 6 months ago there was certain restriction on import, and now you know that the government have outlived all these bans. So again it will it is showing positive impact on the manufacturing side.
So you already mentioned you brought the current account deficit that declined up to 7%, right?
Yeah.
So you also mentioned that there was a ban on the imports. So this reduction in the current account deficit is 7%. Do you associate that one with that particular specific measure of having curbs on imports?
You know that there are certain, you know, that measures on imports as well, but I think now there is no certain measure on import, and you can see even the good thing is that exchange rate is stable over the last 5-6 months. You know that earlier there was too much fluctuation in the exchange rate, so that was uncertainty. And the positive side, even you can see that now our reserves are building. For example, as compared to the previous 6-7 months, now they are around $9 billion. So it means that we can finance our 3 to 4 month import. So that is a healthy indicator. Otherwise, you know that there was a time 1 year ago that our reserve that was just even we cannot finance our import more than 1 month. So that is a good thing, that there is certain stability. And now you know that there was uncertainty before the election, and you know that you can see that every before election there could be uncertainty, but right after the election, when you know that we successfully completed almost this IMF program, you can see even the euro bond value that significantly increased by 95% value. So these are certain symptoms that showing certain trust from the you know that foreign investment, as well as I think the IMF is coming, so there will be no issue that we will successfully conclude this.
I'll come to this particular very important point. We'll take your detailed view regarding as to what are the prospects regarding the negotiations which have already started here in Pakistan with the IMF mission already here. Dr. Ahmad, how do you assess the current indicators as well as the stability that has been brought in with the measures, some tough measures taken by the authorities in Pakistan recently?
I think the situation this time of the year is much better than what it was, you know, last year. Say, in all aspects, whether you look at exports or whether you look at any other measure, you know, even inflation, it was just 29% and now it's come down to 23%. Last year it was much higher, and deficit was much higher. All the indicators are much better now. I mean, we're not out of trouble yet. It will take us a while, and that's why they're going for the next program, IMF program. But overall, it's much better.
Right. Talking specifically about inflation, it's skyrocketed as compared to the figure that we do have currently. As you mentioned, it's down 23% right now, and it crossed 30% previously also. So what measures or efforts do you think were associated with bringing this particular percentage of inflation considerably down to 23%?
I think the biggest factor was this tight monetary policy. They continuing to keep this 22% interest rate. Also, it hurts in many ways. It hurts growth. It hurts many ways, but it's essential for bringing inflation down. That's one factor. The other factor is that if you look at international commodity prices, say you look at FAO index of commodity prices, that's down. I don't exactly know how much, but it's down compared to last year. Petroleum prices have generally stayed stable, and also one other major factor previously was that our, as Dr. Shujat was saying, our exchange rate was really fast declining, and that's been stable for almost now 5-6 months. So all these factors I think have worked for this, and two of the inflations that are much lower than this 23%, I think one is food inflation because of our bumper crops and international prices being low, and the other big fall is I think in transport inflation figures. That's also substantially down because these petroleum prices, which were going up, have stabilized. So, these are two major contributors to bring the inflation down.
Right, Dr. Farooq, when you talk about another statement made by a finance minister, let me quote him that the first quarter of 2024 is better than the first quarter of 2023. GDP is better, there is macroeconomic stability, the exchange rate is also stable. We'll now have to make this macro stability permanent. So what's required to make that macro stability permanent in the immediate term?
Yeah, you know that this is quite tough. You know that in 77 year we went to IMF for 24 time, and now we are thinking another that long-term program with IMF. As finance minister has indicated that we require some $6-7 billion program for a medium term, like 3 to 4 year. So you know that it means that still we are in a danger zone, because whenever you go to IMF, it means that you are not growing well. Look at India, they last time went in early 90s and late 80s, so after that they have bye-bye the IMF. So it means that we still require resources from the IMF. You know that IMF will again say that okay, you have to manage your fiscal balance and you have to manage your external balance. On external balance, again, there is one thing that we have to focus on: export. We are deeply emphasizing that our exports are not rising. Our imports are rising, and with passage of time, you know that our economy has become an imported economy. So whenever we grow, for example, if this economy will grow around 4 to 5%, definitely our import would rise. So if you look at India, like Bangladesh and India, their growth is export driven. So rather than import driven, we require export driven growth. So right now, you know that our exports are just 9 to 10% of GDP. Ideally, our export as a percentage of GDP should be 15 to 20%. So one thing is that is we have to focus on the export side. Second thing is that you know that the big thing is still that inflation. Two things are challenging for us. One is the inflation and the other is interest payment. You know that right now inflation is mostly driven due to that our engagement with the IMF, because that if you look the world prices that are just 6 to 7%, but we are facing double-digit inflation, 20-25%. So mainly is that, for example, we have to increase even in future, like petrol prices, gas prices, because this will be condition of IMF, because we have to make the balance. So again, that inflation would be the challenge, despite that we have a tight monetary policy.
So how can the authorities in Pakistan actually strike their very narrow balance and also manage those inflationary pressures? And of course, we have seen the statements coming from the authorities looking for a new IMF program, a new one, a longer one. So of course, there are going to be conditions. So how the authorities should strike that particular balance?
I think right now that authorities are looking one thing, and that is that tax revenue. That is a good thing that our tax revenues are increasing, but if you look the number, again that is the challenge. Right now that our growth is not too efficient, that is just 2%. On 2% growth, you don't have to impose too much taxes. You have to give these subsidies, because we are in a that recession. And if you look the economic outlook, our non-tax revenue increased significantly. That is 116%. So it means that we are imposing certain levy taxes, federal excise duties, etc. We have to give certain relief on these taxes, especially in the manufacturing sector, especially those sectors that are involved in the export sector. On the other side, that there is one thing that on fiscal balance there are two things. One, either raise the taxes, other side is that reduce your expenditure. Unfortunately, still we are unable to reduce the government expenditures. So on this side, that we require a major reform, for example, and that structural reform should be first cover that we require efficient government, the size of federal government that should be reduced. And second, that is SOEs, state-owned enterprises, that right now 1.5 trillion that losses are going to state.
So what about cutting the expenditure of the PSDP through the public-private partnership? Does it also come under that particular ambit when it comes to controlling the overall expenditure as well as raising the taxes? So keeping the first part in view, cutting the expenditure overall.
There are two components, that of expenditure. One is the current expenditure. So basically, that goes to salaries, pensions, and running the government. I am talking that after 18th Amendment, around half of federal government size that should be reduced. So we require efficient governments. Second is, that again current expenditure, that is certain subsidies, again go to targeted subsidies rather than uniform subsidies. Third is SOE, state-owned enterprises. Again, this is part of current expenditure. You are talking on PSTP, that is basically the development expenditure. Definitely, that if the private sector that can come and that can invest, why the government should invest? And you can see one challenging thing, that is basically credit to private sector. That declined by 80%. Still, that major borrower from the domestic bank, that is still the government. So this is overcrowding, that if government will borrow 90% of the, total investment, there will be a poor cushion for the private sector. So definitely if private sector would come and that will involve in the PSTP budget, government would have much more relief, and that we can spend this amount on certain other development.
Right, Dr. Ahmad, now raising the taxes, I'll come to this particular point also regarding the restructuring and the reforms at the FBR. Also, the finance minister saying that digitization of the tax system is a top priority, has urged an end-to-end digitization. Broadening the tax base is also highlighted. The government is making strategies for including certain undocumented sectors, for example, the real estate, agriculture, as well as wholesale and the retail sector, right? So specifically when we talk about cutting the expenditure, is it only related with the size or the functioning of the government, or are there other areas where we can put a focus on cutting the expenditure from?
Well, the other two big heads where this money is going, one is in the state operated enterprises, huge amount going there, subsidies every year, and the other big head has been with the high interest rate, because the government borrowing, it's all government borrowing, because private sector is not borrowing, because of this 22% and say 25% borrowing, doesn't make sense for them. So the government has been borrowing, and this high interest rate, the expenditure is going. But I think the finance minister has hinted that although it's the state bank and the monetary policy committee that will decide, but considering that inflation has come down, considering other factors, he sees it likely that this interest rate will come down in the near future.
Right, about the taxes, especially when we talk about digitizing the tax system being the priority for the authorities here in Pakistan now, by looking at these statements, what's required for that?
I think the good thing is that in the past, when a government change, the new government come, they restart everything afresh. Now, what we have heard from the finance minister, that he's not, discussions already taken place, there is a roadmap, and he wants to go for implementation. So what the previous caretaker government had done was, all whatever was needed to restructure, reform, digitize, and so he's going to continue with that. So this will be a head start rather than restarting, from a year ahead. So I think, and this time they are involving, for example, digitization. There's Melinda Gates Foundation is putting in some money. There's Karandas here, this already working on, they have the expertise, so FBR, etc. So this is, I think, going to be a success.
Right, so when we specifically talk about improving the governance of the Federal Board of Revenue, what steps and measures are required in that direction?
2 or 3 major steps. One, they think that this is huge, the organization itself, about 26,000 people, and customs has a completely different function, and other indirect within the country taxes, they are different functions, so they should be separated. This has been done successfully by almost all countries in the world. India did it 30 years ago, and most other countries have done it. Maybe a few African countries are still with the so that's one thing. The other thing
And
is that
separating the customs and the
And
tax
income tax.
collection authority.
yeah, the domestic tax, whatever we ran, what we call the indirect, domestic taxes, income tax and other taxes that are collected locally. So that the two departments will be separated. One. The other is that in the past, this policy making and implementation, policy making for tax and as well as collection of tax was all mixed up. So whenever FBR say needed another 100 billion, so the same guys will pick up a few items and propose some implementation of tax. So they want to keep it separate so that there's a conflict of interest. That will be the other thing, big thing. The third big thing is that these boards, there will be they'll be called Directorate Generals of Customs and Directorate General of Income Tax, but there will be oversight board. So these are the three big this thing, and for all this, digitization goes parallel for both departments.
So digitization plays a crucial part in all these particular steps
Yes,
that you've just
yes.
mentioned. So when you specifically talk about these boards, the oversight bodies, so what basically they are going to have the major function of?
Or they will determine this key indicators, performance indicators, KPIs. They will set something, what should be the target, how it's going to be achieved, what are the requirements of the department. So, there is some oversight on how it is going. For the time being, there's no oversight. I mean, there's the board and then reports directly to the finance minister. Finance minister is busy with hundreds of other things. So they're completely on their own. So they think that better compliance and better management.
So one more thing that is related to it, the comprehensive documentation.
Yes.
How to go about that?
Yes.
Is it also directly related with digitization,
Yes.
or with bringing in digitization, it's naturally going to lead into comprehensive documentation? Is that so?
Yes, they are, in fact, they're setting up policy reform units within the organization. So they're going to hire some young people who are familiar about data collection, about how to use that data. For example, if everyone's in this country, they should know how much was the bill for electricity, how much for gas, how much he traveled, what are other expenses, and then they can quite easily tell who is not paying the taxes. They can bring everybody. So that's what they're going towards that.
Right, Dr. Farooq, now SOEs you already mentioned, and the authorities seem pretty determined regarding the dealing with this particular issue of state-owned enterprises. Talking about, as Dr. Ahmad has already highlighted, high interest rate. Now, since given the fact the inflation has considerably reduced from where it used to be previously, now do you think there might be a consideration regarding reviewing this particular interest rate?
That right now still our interest rate, that is around 22% as per monetary policy committee. As per that if you look the world economy, mostly in European countries and in developed economies, interest rate is high and there is tight monetary policy. And this tight monetary policy led a recession on one side, but it significantly reduced the inflation. That it's 6 to 7%, but depend on country situation. In Pakistan, it is around 28%, 23%. We are expecting that in next, couple of quarter, it will decline, but still it will remain high. And I think in 2025, next year, it will come, below 15%. So it will still remain high.
Right. When we talk about dealing or addressing the problems which are related to the state-owned enterprises which are non-profitable, what challenges usually occur when dealing with this phenomenon of non-profitability of the SOEs?
The big challenge is that, for example, we developed the privatization commission in early 90s. I think it was established in 1991. Still we are confused. still we are confused whether we have to privatize or not. There are, you know, that various scenarios. Okay, sometime we say that okay, let's privatize. Sometimes we say that okay, involve the private sector and opt the public-private partnership model. You know that we have privatized various organizations, like for example, you can see HBL, you can see, you know, that telecom, PTCL, but you know that the major, there are 1-2 organizations that we must have to focus. One, you know, that is the power sector. Again, the model exists. You know that in power sector, you know that the existing regulatory framework, there is certain distinction, you know, that on production, on transmission, and on distribution. But the real fact is that, for example, we have 9 discos still that are run by the government sector. Why the government sector is running? Just put certain efficient CEOs, just as Dr. Manzoor said, that involve certain key performance indicators, and these will definitely perform. So I think if we look over the last 20 years, whatever we have taken the loan, we have make more losses in the private sector that are around 22 trillion in 20 years. So that is, you know, that we have to focus. Again, synergy required, willpower required. Issue is not a big.
Right, Dr. Ahmad, your point, your understanding regarding this, dealing with the power sector in particular.
Yes, I mean there are these what they call distribution companies or discos, and some of them have been really bleeding, and they have been discussing whether they should give it to the provincial governments or what should they do. I think the new finance minister has said he would rather privatize them. So he'll be going in that direction, but maybe some of them could be handed over to the provinces who will have better control rather than from the federal.
Right. So when the authorities go for privatizing a certain particular state-owned enterprise, what possible challenges do come in the way in that particular process?
Well, the biggest challenge comes from the employees who are employed there, because all government state enterprises, they are highly overstaffed. So you look at steel mills, it's been closed from 2016, 15 I think, it's now 8-9 years, and there's still more than 3,000 people working, and it's very difficult to get rid of them. And when the problem is that there are political angle, because some parties feel that you know, we don't want to increase unemployment, etc., and they were kind of responsible for putting those people there. So they oppose this. These are, I think, the 2 major challenges.
So this particular problem of dealing away with those employees, or if you mention that overstaffing in a certain state-owned enterprises. So how to deal with those people who will ultimately or subsequently lose the jobs? I mean, of course, it has to be responsibility. The authorities would have to consider it. Why would authorities consider rendering the people jobless? I mean, it happens to be a big challenge, a contentious point.
Yes, but you know, if we say, you know, Dr. Shujat was saying about this banking and PTCL, they were very similar. Banks were highly over, and what the banks did after privatization, they paid off whatever lump sum, etc., got rid of them, but in the process they became more efficient. They again started hiring. They digitized everything, opened far more branches, many more banks came in. So this is a short term, I should say, pain, but in the long term, this creates more employment, because those employees find them. But just for keeping some people there, because you know, this is after all,
paying them with ultimate compensation is going to be the solution for that. If a certain state-owned enterprise is
doesn't matter. You know, you pay them once, but for example, for the steel mills, from 2015, had they paid those 3,100, they said, okay, for your life, this is your pension, stay home, and get rid of them. And you know, by now the issue would have been resolved, and maybe they would, but that payment compared to the bigger loss is much less. It's the same thing with PIA. I mean, you know, every year they have 45, 50, 100 billion they put in there. But you know, if they, look at Air India, they did this, and they sold it to Tata, and just now Air India, I think they placed an order for 500 new aircrafts, because within 2-3 years their punctuality, everything changed, and from losses. It's the same thing with banking. Previously, when they were in government, they used to dole out these loans to influential politicians. There was always a scandal, and now since privatization, you don't hear that. Yeah.
Right, Dr. Farooq, your understanding regarding that, when it comes to dealing with this particular challenge of doing away with those employees who are associated with these state-owned enterprises, Dr. Ahmad has mentioned that most of them happen to be overstaffed. So what remedy do you think could be the most viable and the feasible one?
I think efficiency matters. Efficiency matters. When you know that the private sector will come, it will definitely invest. You know that whether it is the steel mill, whether it is PIA, or whether it is discos, the private sector will come, and they will they will definitely invest more. For example, if Tata is now managing the Air India, and they will add 472 new aircraft in in the airline, so definitely there will be more job opportunities as compared to that whatever that Air India was offering. So I don't think that there would be too much loss. That's yes, there will be temporary abruptment, but after certain time that overall there would be too much efficiency and too much gain for the efficient employees. Yes, some of them might be fired, but that you have to do the cost benefit analysis. Like for example, if right now we are suffering with 1.5 trillion every year, and for example if we spend 500 billion on the compensation, and same has been done in PTCL, same has been done in HBL very efficiently, there was no issue. But again, one challenge is that various stakeholders of the state, they have to sit together and they have to be very clear on the decision, because that for example sometimes courts came and there could be certain stays, etc., then all that the goodwill, etc., that would that could be compromised.
Right, before moving on to another aspect that has been mentioned by the finance minister, let's talk about, I just want your detailed understanding regarding this tax collection system and the kind of reforms that have been the authorities are aiming to bring in. The broadening the tax base, improving the FBR governance, the comprehensive documentation, as well as the full-scale digitization. Dr. Ahmad gave a very detailed understanding of it. What's your view regarding it?
I don't think that tax collection is too much a big issue in Pakistan. For example, if you look over this last 7 months, our tax revenue increased by 30%. And non-tax revenue increased by 117%. So that, for example, still we are collecting too much taxes. So yes, there are certain skewness. For example, Dr. Manzoor can tell better that, for example, we have too much taxes on our trade. So that we have to load down. For example, Pakistan and I think Egypt, these are two countries that have heavy taxes, that on trade. So definitely, that it compromise globalization, competitiveness. So we have to think. Second, that provinces, like right now, all the taxes that is federal subject, provinces, that they have no ownership. So we have to onboard the provinces, and especially the local government, even in future, that for example GST that should be collected by provinces, local government should collect it, that the property tax. So definitely it will increase the ownership. Like right now you can see that federal government, that is quite weak. Provincial government, as per NFC award, they are getting that more revenues, and federal government have to take the liability of SOEs, interest payment, all that. So that is the issue. Third, that digitization, we well know that we have to do the digitize, and I think in digitization the government should just focus on the data. We have lot of data. The data that is available with banks, data is available with certain artificial intelligence, data is available that of the markets. So issue is that still we are encouraging the economy toward informal sector. You are saying that we have to broaden the tax base. Yes, absolutely. For example, right now you can see that provincial tax revenue share, that is just 1%. So it should be go to 30-40%. So definitely when they will take the ownership, they will take certain discos, that losses, etc. So they have to do the effort. On the other side, on digitization, again, you know that, for example, there are two areas that we have to focus. One is the agriculture, and the other is, you know, that wholesale and retail sector. These two sectors, they contribute 45% in GDP, but right now their tax share is just 2%, you know that. So we have to increase the tax base rather than putting more taxes on those peoples and sectors that are already.
You already mentioned the numbers that you have mentioned, for example, the non-tax revenue on 16%, saying that collection of the tax is not that bigger an issue, talking specifically about broadening the tax base. We have also seen statements coming of broadening the tax base by incorporating the wholesale, retail, real estate and agriculture sector. You mentioned two of them, which collectively form 2% of the tax revenue.
Yeah.
Despite being 45% contributor in GDP. Right.
Yeah.
And is digitization the only solution to that? And if these sectors are going to be incorporated into documented economy for raising more revenues from here, are there any challenges on the way?
I think the big challenge is that right now that I am facing, that is the gap between state authorities and society. So, you know that still there is trust deficit. For example, if government will impose more taxes, or government will introduce new taxes in agriculture sector or in wholesale retail sector, you know that there is trust deficit. So right now I think first the government, whatever have to do, that have to build the trust building. For example, if tomorrow we will impose certain taxes on retail, you know that trade unions, they will go on strike. If we will impose taxes on agriculture sector, provinces might be reluctant. So we have to build certain trust. Without building the trust, it would be too difficult, you know that to increase the tax.
How can that trust be built? Is there any chance that there could be some incentives later on subsequently that could be introduced in order to win that particular trust among all the stakeholders?
Yeah, incentive could be one thing, but I think the other thing could be that there should be certain, you know, that commitment and slogans from the government side that every person, you know, that they have to pay tax, and we have to lower down the tax. I am not saying, for example, that you put too much tax, but for example 1-2% tax even on wholesale retail, that will, you know, that will significantly raise.
So there is one very important thing that has been mentioned by a finance minister regarding the China's bond market. How can Pakistan capitalize from this? What are the dividends associated with
You know that this bond market, Pakistan, I think first time entered in this bond market in 1996, and we started to sell the Euro bond, you know that in international market. Again, this is just, you know that getting the loan from international community, international individuals. I think we have around $6 to $7 billion right now, the bond that we have sold in international market. This is basically your medium and long term selling, sometimes for 5 year, for 10 year, and even, you know, that 20-30 year. So that would be another way that, for example, if we sell, you know, that bond in China market right now, we have even the agreement with China that we can opt the Chinese currency as our the second currency. We have the MOU with them. So definitely, and we are going to the second phase of the CPEC. So it means that there would be too much penetration between Pakistan and China and trade, etc., etc. So definitely, that could be another way through which we can get the loan from.
Right, Dr. Ahmad, your understanding regarding the China's bond market. Pakistan will be entering into it as per the finance minister in the ongoing year.
Yes, I mean, till about a year ago, we were in no situation. I mean, the government kept thinking about entering bond market, borrowing some more, but they realized that their bonds were not doing very well, so they will have to give a huge discount. But things have changed now in the last 6 months. And the other thing is that the Chinese market, there's a lot of, despite their recent problems, there's a lot of surplus funding they are spending in, you know, this Belt Road and here and there. So that is, I think, a good way to go there for this, trying to explore that market and raise some money from there.
Right, talking about the IMF mission, which is here to have the final, the final review of the $3 billion standby arrangement. As per the Finance Ministry's statement. They are pretty much optimistic about getting this review done and ultimately the release of that 1.1 billion tranche, the final tranche. But how hopeful are you? Because Pakistani authorities had to really implement really some tough conditions in order to stabilize the economy and navigating through this particular program.
I think Pakistan has already done those. You know, there are 2 or 3 key things. One, they insisted that exchange rate, market-driven exchange rate, we are already there. Energy, we should not be subsidizing. It should be according to, you know, at least we meet the costs. We are already there. So if you look at the tax target, we are going to meet. It was 30% up compared to last year, but this year we are on track. I mean, despite some fall in the last 2 months, but we are on track to meet that target. So various things, and I think there was some statement from the Ministry of Finance that out of 25 policy action points that we had to comply with, 24 have been done, and the 25th they said it is insignificant. So they are, I think, on track. I don't see any major problems.
Right. Finance Minister has also said that Pakistan is going to ask for a newer and a longer extended fund facility. How do you see that transition from the standby arrangement to that longer extended fund facility would be?
I think it was known for quite a while that with the previous and with all the problems that we had because of COVID, because of floods, because of everything, that we will need another program. So IMF already knew it, and the fact that especially with this caretaker government, we have been able to implement the conditionalities, and we didn't kind of as previously we didn't dodge. So they realized that they are now serious about these reforms, the state-operated enterprise reform, exchange rate reform, energy reforms, whatever they, and so we are on track. I mean, they've been put in motion. We have not as yet been able to do any privatization or some of the other things, but program is ongoing.
Right, Dr. Farooq, transitioning from this $3 billion SBA to a bigger, a newer EFF, how that transition do you think might happen, and are there going to be some challenges on the way when it comes to newer conditions, most probably by the IMF?
You know that this standby agreement, you know that it was just for 9 months. So definitely you have to take actions after each 3 year. For example, 3 months. Sorry, for example, we were rising the prices of power sector. We have to increase the prices of gas. For example, if it would be 3 to 4 year medium term agreement, the government will have the relief. They have they have to strategize the economy. So definitely there would be certain condition from the IMF side, and I feel that the government have to very carefully see what the action they have to take in next 5 years. Again, 1 to 2 year would be challenging. Again, in 1 to 2 year, we have to take certain hard measures. There might be certain compromise on, you know, that taxes. There might be, we have to face inflation. Energy prices could rise, but we require certain serious structural reforms. And after 2 years, then we would be in this position that we can reap the benefits of that.
Your last closing comments regarding the potential of the second phase of the China-Pakistan economic corridor. We have seen the interview with the Chinese state news agency of Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif saying that Pakistan is now ready to move towards the second phase of CPAC, aiming to promote technological development and agriculture through the corridor.
Yeah, you know that in first phase, I think we have done good job in 2 areas. One is the energy and the other is infrastructure. Right now, we don't have the energy crisis, and infrastructure, you know that right now, that is quite comparative, that is rising. There is also, you know, that railway track, etc. But the real, yes, absolutely, agriculture and IT, it have huge potential. You know that still our exports are quite basic. Our agriculture productivity, that is not rising. So definitely the technology that will boost the agriculture sector to a productive sector, that will create the job in this sector.
Right, Dr. Ahmad, your closing comment regarding it, the revitalization of CPAC, especially towards the technological development under the CPAC as well as towards the agricultural growth.
Well, you know, as Dr. Shujat just said, I mean, the first phase was more about
Energy and infrastructure.
energy and infrastructure, and the next phase should be about production, manufacturing, about agriculture productivity, etc. All that. And so now that we have the energy and we have the infrastructure, we can move goods from road to to market, from farm to market, etc. So I think it's logical time to go in the next phase.
Dr. Manzoor Ahmad, Member Task Force on FDR and Tax Reforms, former ambassador at the World Trade Organization also. Thank you very much for being with us on the show tonight. Really appreciate that. Dr. Shujat Farooq, Chief of Research at Pakistan Institute of Development Economics. Thank you very much for your time, Dr. Farooq, also for being with us on the show tonight. We really appreciate that. With that, we come to the end of today's episode. Till the next one, take good care of yourselves.